welcome to another edition of Surgeons' Lives. I'm John Monson, your host. Today's guest is an old friend of mine, Dr. Robbie Madoff, and is best known for, I guess, being a stalwart of the University of Minnesota Colon and Rectal Surgery group, the oldest fellowship program in the country, in the US, and is also best known for being a DCR editor-in-chief for a number of years, where he set the standard for the highest scientific integrity. I know him as being a man of many interests and a thoughtful individual who could spread his wisdom far and wide. I'm looking forward very much to talking to him today. So without further ado, let's join the discussion. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Look at that groovy background you have there, John.
Specially designed for you.
Thank you so much.
But welcome, and thanks for taking time out of your
my busy day.
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to that, I'm sure. So this, as I said to you before, this is all about not so much about the wonderfulness of a surgeon as the surgeon, because there are many opportunities for surgeons to tell people about their career, academic or clinical. And we will talk about that, obviously, because it's inextricably linked with the rest of your life, but also just to talk about some other aspects of life. Sometimes it's hobbies, sometimes it's just interests, or I'm sure you know Fabio Potenti, for example, who is currently sailing across the Pacific in a catamaran.
No kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to hang up now.
Yes, it is a little intimidating. So
I feel shamed.
So normally what I been doing is to, just as a starting point, is to ask people just to give the assembled millions who are viewing this or will be viewing this a brief introduction to life and time, starting with the words "I was born in." So
okay.
Off you go.
That was my cue.
That was your cue.
Do I have to say my name?
No, you do not.
Okay. May I say thanks for having me?
It's a pleasure.
So I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. And for anybody who knows me and knows that I spent really almost my entire career in Minneapolis, living in the Midwest for most of my life came as a big surprise. It was never my intention. But I was actually the son of a surgeon. My dad was a cardiothoracic surgeon. I never exactly had the intention to go to medical school, but never had the intention not to. And when I got to college, I thought I'd try out being a pre-med, and then it was the thin edge of the wedge, and off I went. I went to college at Harvard. I went to medical school at Columbia. I was actually very torn about what I was going to do with my career. I didn't know that, again, I had tremendously ambivalent feelings about being a surgeon. And right down to the last moment, I didn't know if I was going to be applying in internal medicine, which basically the teaching at that institution, many institutions, was if you're not an internist, you're a moron. Mm. I wanted to be a smart guy. So I dabbled with that idea a lot, and not quite at random, but almost. And after a lot of agonizing, I decided to go into surgery. I matched with my then girlfriend, now wife, Jane, and we came to the University of Minnesota. I did okay for a year of surgery. My second year of surgery, I actually absolutely hated it. Thought it was a tremendous waste of time. I didn't think I was learning anything. I was chasing around trying to find people who wanted their gallbladders out for no reason, and just doing scut and not being challenged in any particular way. I dropped off track, that this is not tenable. I don't want to do this. And I actually went to the Department of Medicine for a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And what I discovered there was that that was even worse. I was actually appalled, and I know this is not fair to medicine, but nothing got done. There was a lot of twirling around and getting consults, but we never really seemed to accomplish much in my work.
So at this point, when things were not exactly as envisaged, shall we say, were you thinking that this was a professional phenomenon, like associated with the phenomenon of surgery and medicine, or were you thinking this is Minneapolis? Where were you in your thinking?
Yeah, no, I actually still like the idea of being a doctor. I'd come to that. That was good. But I was really lost about how to accomplish that. I thought a little bit about going into anesthesia. I thought a little bit about changing programs. I actually sort of had a brief dalliance with your old place, University of Rochester. I never went there, but it was in communication with them. And then to settle the issue, I decided to drop out for a year. And I took a year off and traveled the world. So just escaped completely.
Very much like Aaron Rodgers has done for 3 days, apparently.
Isn't he like packing himself in melted chicken fat or something to facilitate his thought process?
I think he went into a darkened room for 3 days.
A darkened room.
Probably
without
intellectually the same thing, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, the chicken fat helps, honestly and truly.
So do you think this was, I talked to an orthopedic surgeon recently who, left Zimbabwe at 18 and went into medical school because that's what you did then. It's not the American model of 4 years of rhetoric or whatever it might be. And he said, when he was 18, he literally did not know who he was. He just followed a plane of least resistance. And he was nothing but fortunate that it turned out okay. But it took him a number of years to work out who and what he was as a person. Was there a degree of that?
I'm that guy.
Actually. Yeah.
And I mean, so going to travel the world was actually something I wanted to do, and I did view it as an opportunity that wouldn't likely come up again. Of course, it didn't. To make a break, I was kind of out of the surgery, the routine, and I wasn't going back to medicine. So there was kind of a natural hiatus there. So part of it was to seize the opportunity. And also, Jane had finished her internal medicine training, and so she was free. So we could do it. So part of it was a practical issue. And part of it was, I was just really totally lost and at sea. Actually, what I did was at the University of Minnesota, where I was training, there was mandatory lab in those days. It was a little bit unusual, but so I had the lab coming up, which normally came after your third year of surgery, and I had just done 2. But I said, I'm on this natural break here. They didn't exactly know I was traveling the world. The department head, Dr. Najarian, actually thought I was still hanging out in the medicine department on the advice of another very senior guy who said, don't tell him, just tell him you want to extend your leave. So anyway, so they kind of thought I was there, but I said, I've been on this break. And while I'm on the break, instead of coming back to third year surgery resident, which I dreaded, I said, why don't I just go into the lab And then when I'm done, I'll finish all my surgery stuff. But it's all broken up anyway. So they said, fine. So I came back from my travels. I went into the lab for 2 years. And then when I came out, probably shouldn't admit it publicly, but they forgot that I hadn't done my third year. So I just came out as a 4. And
Yeah, I don't think there's much they can do about that now.
yeah, no, it was actually all legal. I looked into this very carefully, and I'll fit all the requirements, and everything was fine. But I don't think it's what they had in mind.
One
But
of the advantages of a large department,
a large department, and I was really just a piece of the furniture. I mean, by
Yeah,
now,
sure.
this is now 5 years into since they've known me, and it's like, really, can't you be gone yet?
Yeah,
So it was actually and then when I came out as a 4, even though I didn't know how to do anything, um, you actually had responsibilities, and they actually tried to teach you things, and you weren't standing there back in, before the days of the book Walters holding the Richardsons for hours at a time. And actually, then I started to like it.
and what enormous breakthroughs did you achieve in the 2 years in the lab?
None. And
None.
I was studying cardiac mechanics.
Ah,
And
right.
it was a waste. That was a complete waste.
So do you think it was a waste? I mean, obviously, on one level, yes, but did it teach you any disciplines or any
Um,
intellectual rigor, or was it a flat out waste?
Pretty close to a flat out waste.
Mm.
It would help me once when I was when I was a senior resident in the trauma service, and the guy got shot in his heart, and I was totally calm and comfortable, like sewing on a beating heart. I was used to that, so I
Yeah,
just like,
yeah,
this is just like I've done it. But otherwise, my mentor wasn't really interested in the project. I wasn't
yeah,
really interested in the project.
yeah,
Um, my mentor didn't know anything about it and was not a particularly good mentor to me. And so I put it through my time. It was life in the lab. It wasn't very difficult, so I didn't.
yeah, yeah.
But it was not fruitful. Not
So,
fruitful.
I mean, I have to say, I mean, it's as you say, it's a relatively unusual pathway, and I think many residents, if they told that story, would be following up with, "So I got dumped from the residency," or something like that, etc. But not only did you not get dumped from the residency, but in fact, you never got dumped from Minnesota, period, which
Well,
is
I
pretty
actually,
remarkable.
uh, yeah, I think there's a fair amount of luck involved with that.
Sure.
I, because it was a pyramidal program, and it sort of, in part, it depended on the bodies and the slots going into and coming out of the lab. And so if there was a space and they needed somebody, they could fit me in. If there were no mentors available, or nobody had any funding or something like that, I could have been evaporated. And then who knows, I might have met you at the University of Rochester.
But the interesting thing is, though, that you did stay. I mean, they obviously your gap year, where there wasn't really a natural gap per se, or clearly produced. The product ended up being something that was clearly attractive to them to keep you on ultimately as faculty.
Yeah, well, I found my footing as a
Yeah,
4.
yeah, yeah.
I was a good resident. I was interested and I was engaged. I liked people and I liked the work, and I found it challenging and rewarding. So there was a big change. And maybe, I think it speaks a lot to my immaturity in the first part of it, but I think it also speaks to sort of the stupidity of the system.
Yeah.
That, there's this long run up to what is actually training in surgery, I think.
Yeah.
Less so now than it used to be in them days, when there was this gigantic service component that ate
Yeah.
up your
Yeah.
days, and much less interest in education, I think.
No, for sure.
And but when I finally had something to engage with that engaged me, I was able to do it and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, training in those days was very osmotic and was assumed to occur just by standing within the radiation field of greatness, without anything ever being said. And then, whilst that greatness and osmosis was occurring, there were intermittent blasts of abuse. Just about covered it. And as long as it went on for long enough, you were trained. I think it is very different. I mean, I lived through the introduction of the working time restrictions in the UK, as a chairman, and one of the things that it did was that it moved people away from the osmotic hours, endless hours process to where they actually had to focus on education because those hours were gone, and the trainees were saying, "Hey, according to this contract here, I'm a trainee. So I'd quite like you to train me now, please." And that was a cultural shock that most established surgeons took some time getting their head around. And obviously, as you know, as you go through your career, you meet natural teachers. But you also meet people who are not natural teachers and are really not impressed by the whole thing anyway. So it's been a big change, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point because it was surgery was American surgery and surgery internationally was very slow to come around to that.
Mm-hmm.
The model always had been. And, it's sort of to some extent, I think it's like abused children that they grow up
Yeah,
to abuse their children because it's what they know.
yeah, for sure.
That's
So fast forward then, and colorectal fellowship and faculty.
so I did so I fell under the sway of various colorectal surgeons in Minnesota. The very first one actually was before I thought I was going to go into the field was Sandy Santat Avathon, as he's known to the world, who when I was an intern, he was the sole colorectal attending at the university. And there was the ongoing rectal cancer screening study that was proctoscoping people. So I
What?
used to go to clinic in the morning and you would proctoscope 25 people. And Sandy said very wisely to me, he said, "Okay, this is how you do it. You only ever ask 3 questions. Any change your bowels, any bleeding, and I forget what the third one was, and never ask them until they're head down because you put them on the exam table, tip them bottom up the old-fashioned way." He says, "Otherwise, they talk too much." So it was actually my first model was Sandy, and then he went off to Mayo, and
Yeah.
then go into this. Then a guy who maybe you don't, Mel Bubrick, who was a wonderful guy at the county hospital, just a great mensch and a natural educator and real model. And then I fell under the sway of Stan Goldberg, Dave Rothenberger, and that crowd, Doug Wong, John Bowles. So I ended up doing my fellowship there. And then when I finished it, I actually went back east. I didn't really want to live in Minnesota.
Ah,
So I had a job at UMass for 2 years. And then after 1 year, the group called me back and wanted to hire me. And then I agonized and agonized about should I leave my home base,
yeah,
Massachusetts,
yeah.
family and friends and all kinds of people there. And had a very hard time deciding it, but ended up back in Minnesota and went on to faculty.
Which turned out to be a good decision. I mean, you did great things there, and became part of the faculty furniture for many years.
Yeah, it's I'll never know if it was a good decision or not, honestly.
Sure,
Professionally, it was the obvious choice. It was like the professional decision was go
yeah,
back there. That was a better, more promising job, more opportunities. Um, it was a wrench from the family that
yeah,
lasted for 40 years or 30 or
yeah.
30. years. Um, but anyway, it worked out. I liked living in Minnesota. I liked Minnesota. I liked our division a lot, really a lot. I was fulfilled professionally in many, many ways, more than I necessarily would have been. So it was a good decision for sure professionally.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't look back on it and say that I've screwed up my life by
No,
deciding.
sure, sure. And
Uh,
you obviously had, I mean, you've obviously been able to identify mentors in your life. I mean, you mentioned the mentor that, the standard answer would be in Minnesota, your mentor has to be Stan Goldberg, but you've obviously got other, had other mentors during your time there as well.
yeah, I mean, Stan is a unique guy, as
Yeah.
you know, most people know. He's a zealot about colorectal surgery. He's
Yeah.
devoted to it. He loves it. He wants other people to love it. He's a wonderful teacher. He is, and I think part of it is when you were working with Stan, you felt like, well, I can really do this stuff. And of course, why you could do it was Stan was set everything up, and everything was. He's a very tidy surgeon. Everything was neat and under control, and it's encouraging. But then there was a large faculty always in Minnesota,
Yeah.
and so there were a lot of different styles that you could absorb, and a lot of things you could take from different individuals.
And of course, the Minnesota model is not as I don't know what the word is, but it's not a single campus traditional model. I mean, it's scattered across numerous hospitals, a little bit like our group in Florida. We're in multiple different hospitals. You and I discussed that at one point, which brings its own issues. And I've, despite what you might think, I always try to listen to what you tell me. And I do remember you telling me that the key to success in that environment was, in your case, in the Minnesota case, was that the fellowship was the glue that held everybody together. I think you said on Fridays, for example, and that glue was really critical.
Yeah, well, you have a good memory, but that's actually that's really true. And there's always been a very strong. This comes directly from Stan. A strong sense of training the next generation. People who come there to be on the faculty largely come because they like that feeling and they want to be involved in the training. And there is a real sense of unity there. The group is basically bipartite in a sense, because there's which is not what it was when I started. Everybody worked for Stan's group, which was basically a private practice group,
Right.
and the group covered the university hospital practice.
Okay.
And then some years later, Dave Rothenberger actually went over to be a full-timer at the U. He was the first. And so now there's a group of 5 at the U, and there's a group of about 15, changes from year to year a little bit in the private group. And they still share this common devotion to the training program. But they work for, they're financial competitors. So, provides a little bit of friction that didn't used to be there.
Yeah. It's definitely an unusual model, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you couldn't create it from scratch again. I think there's been a lot of historical buy-in to it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I've always, in my mind, rightly or wrongly, viewed you, and I'm sure this is a cheesy phrase, but viewed you as a man of some culture and thoughtfulness, with interests outside rightly or wrongly, that was always my sense. Has life been to you for 30 years in Minnesota outside of operating on hemorrhoids and colons, etc.? And where did it come from?
So, culturally, that has cultural interests have always been a big deal for me. So that's been constant since adulthood, I would say. So, Minnesota, I mean, now I'm living in New York, and, it's like a playground. There's zillions of museums, cultural institutions, music, arts, there's theater. Now I'm just going around reaping what's here, which is fantastic. In Minnesota, there was actually a very lively cultural scene as well. They had two orchestras, they had the Guthrie Theater, they had small theaters. So I was busy with all that kind of stuff. I've been a pretty avid reader of, I kind of like the long, boring books, specialty, but fiction and a lot of nonfiction. So that's always been a piece. So I like to think of myself the way that you have kindly thought of me, as sort of myself. I am interested in a lot of things, and stimulated by a lot of cultural things, movies.
I never checked as to whether you were one of the few people who had read Ulysses and finished it.
I have read Ulysses and finished it.
Yes,
I have done it. And I'm gearing up, because you really have to read it, people say, a second time to enjoy it, because it was.
It says,
read it and finished it, or read it and petered out?
Well, I think many people. I have to admit, I did peter out. And you're not meant to say that, being Irish and all of that sort of stuff, but I know
we're down to hard truths here, John.
Exactly.
We're bearing everything.
I always remember the phrase when somebody was talking about Wagner's music, and the phrase was, "Yes, it's not as bad as it sounds." So now,
I have made yes, I have made it through that. It is, but it's difficult work when it breaks into a chapter that's written in Middle English. It's really, it's an act of faith through, and you need help. You just can't do it without reading things or taking a course or doing something on the side, so you just have a clue.
I can't imagine he would have been an easy person to be stuck in an elevator with. An
elevator, the ride would end soon enough.
It's just a guess. But so now you you found, and I'm kind of doing this chronologically, although there's no reason to, but you found a phase of your life which probably went on for a decade or more, in the journal work that you did. I mean, obviously you had an academic career that went on all the way, but you found yourself suddenly, you were that person who followed a legend as editor-in-chief of DCR. I recall that process quite well. Why did you do that? Why did you want to do that?
Well, I liked it a lot. I've been doing it for quite a while. So I can't possibly tell you the number of years, but I had joined the editorial board some years back. And then Dr. Fazio made me one of the co-editors. So as you know, the structure of that journal, it's a working journal. The co-editors basically shared the submissions, and you took care of your own submissions and did the process much like the editor-in-chief does, although not quite as much as the editor-in-chief does. But I quite like that as well. And I liked, I felt like I could have an impact on our society and on the education of surgeons by trying to, my main thing, even when I became editor-in-chief, was get rid of the junk that was filling the journal. I think that we wanted to, everybody wanted to get rid of the case reports, which are amusing, but not very, often not that educational, not good for your impact factor. Weak papers, small retrospective experiences, some by important people within the society, some just by regular Joes trying to get something published. Survey papers taking snapshots with typical response rates of 35% of the people happen to answer the survey, felt you should do this and not that. There's a lot of fat to be trimmed out of the journal. And I like that opportunity to try, and I wanted to improve the quality of the journal. So when I was co-editor, Jim Church and John Rombo were the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vic got sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was sort of the three of us, it was kind of a triumvirate who were doing the journal jointly, not with a specific leader. And then I applied to be the editor-in-chief, and got the job. And that was really my agenda, was that I wanted, the minor things where I wanted to give it a more unified design and stop having everybody send in the graphs that they drew or they did in their computers.
Yeah.
That, like stylistically barbaric and ugly. So I want to change that. But I really, my main effort was to try and increase the quality of stuff that we got and try and get rid of the bad stuff that we were publishing. And turned out it was sort of a virtuous circle, because as you did that, the impact factor started going up. That draws more papers, better quality papers, you can choose things better. And so that was my goal for doing it. And I, found it stimulating and liked the work, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been interesting serving as a co-editor for the last few years, that the gods clearly were unhappy with what you did, because one of the side effects of COVID was the most spectacular increase in submissions to the journal, with an unbelievable rise in the amount of rubbish. And it's been really quite and it's not just DCR, all the journals will say that now, that, the number of submissions have rocketed. And there, all of those things that you described, those categories, have reemerged in a reinvigorated manner, and take, I spent many years almost never rejecting a paper without a review. All editors or co-editors have their own little personal fetish about what they like or don't like, etc. But I rarely did that, and I find myself doing it more and more often. And the other problem that's emerged from COVID is that it's become amazingly difficult to get people to review papers now. It takes, I would request maybe 6 reviewers to get 2, and that was not the case. And I do recall when you ruled the editorial board with that famous iron fist, clothed in velvet, of course. I think everyone knew on the editorial board that declining to review a paper was not really an understandable phenomenon. But that's gone as well now, which is
even on the board.
Even on the board,
because that really just applied to board members. That this was
no, for sure, yes, I understand,
right.
and reasonably so,
right.
But no, it's a different environment from COVID. I think it's definitively related to COVID. So,
but I have to say, just it's part of the maturation of having the editor role or co-editor role, because I mean, I also used to think I'm not going to reject anything just because I don't like it. But then what it turns out, if it's something that you really know at the end of the day, you just think it's beyond the pale. It's not good enough. You send it out for review. The dirty secret of peer review is that it's so random what people think about the papers. I mean, you
It
pick
is, yeah.
qualified people, but the disparity in the opinions that you get are typically 3 reviews, 1 accept, 1 reject, and 1
Yeah.
revise. Is sort of your usual.
Yeah.
But when I used to send out papers, I thought, well, I'll just send this out, to some tough guys so that I won't have to deal with it, or just, send it out so I have some other comments and some other insight into it. And then people say, even though it's just a survey, but I really like it. Everybody
Yeah.
shed light on what the third. So increasingly, it's like I don't want to make apologies for not accepting this thing. It's just not the quality. I can make this basic assessment of the quality at this level. I can see
Yeah.
the bottom
Yeah.
cutoff.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I had that same exact evolution as you, and then I was always just dealing with these things that people like that I just thought was yes, but the methodology is so bad. There's no, even if it might be interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Keep
And we
it up. Keep
will
it up.
skip past the brief existence of Wacko's Corner, as you phrased it, which thankfully is lost in the mists of time. So,
Well, when you become editor in chief, you can bring it back.
no, thank you. So now you spent your career in Minnesota with Stan, who, as you say, is unique and a legend and all sorts of things, and is continues to be passionate and committed and involved, and is an example of somebody who has not stepped away,
Yeah.
and yet you have, and you've stepped away, both functionally and physically, stepped away. So, how did that thought process? I'm always interested in, why some people continue working forever and ever, and some people go, okay, I'm done here. The late great John Gallagher finished his clinic on a Friday afternoon, the week after his 65th birthday, and packed his bag and left, as he had always said he would. I mean, he was a very rigid man in many respects, but he said he would, and he did. He said he would stop clinical practice on his 70th birthday, and he did, literally that day. So how did you work that out in your mind?
Yeah, well, he's more organized than I am. I think the thing that actually drove this, it would not necessarily have been this way. I was actually quite enjoying what I was doing still. I could have used less of it. I never really hit a taper. I was still busy clinically pretty much up to the end, except getting off of call for a few years, with eternal thanks to my partners who carried the load. But the factor for me was that I was going to come back east because my kids are here, my grandkids are here, the rest of my family is here, and both Jane and I thought it was time to come back east and not miss the whole grandparent experience. So we were going, and once I knew that, it was like, do I want to get a New York license? Do I want to be working once I get there? How do I even conceive of doing that? And what's the point of retiring? So had it been my kids were still in Minnesota, for example, I would have dialed down like everybody does. I would have probably stopped doing abdominal cases, and, scrubbed some of the harder cases with the kids, and kept up doing scopes and, something like that, and just sort of tapered off. But as it turned out, it wasn't really a realistic option. So, it was a funny experience because as I was, as much as I, really, I didn't deserve it, because as you can see, with all my struggles of getting into this field, there's no reason that I should have had a fulfilling career, because I had no idea what I was doing into it. But it turned out I did. And as I was stopping things at the very end, which happened in pretty rapid succession, it was like every little event that occurred was pretty unemotional to me. It surprised me. I did my last big case, and I thought, going to the operating room so much of your time, so many days of the week for so many years, you're just not doing that again, huh?
Yeah.
It was almost an out of body experience, but it didn't really register with me in an emotional kind of way. Did my last scope, saw my last patient, and then all of a sudden I wasn't doing anything anymore. I was done. Of course, we all know people who retire. They feel great for a little while or not, but then they sort of drop into the abyss and feel they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
They get depressed. So far, touch wood, it hasn't happened to me. I feel good, but I was surprised that I could just sort of drop it and let it go.
And was that, as you say, crossing your radar was, should I get a New York license? And to me, the additional questions to that was, even if I did, what would I do with it, and who would want me, and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, why would I look at and say, if I was an employer, why would I want me, at this stage of my life, etc. But did you just intellectually work that out and say, no, I don't want to, why would I? No, I'm not going to do that, or what?
Well, I think part of it is inherent in the business of being a surgeon. So it's not like you can do major cases,
Yeah,
1 day a week, and
yeah.
not think about them for the other 6 days a week, or worry about them, or have complications, that whole panoply of things. If I had wanted to, I suppose I could have found work doing, the day surgery things, scopes. The only thing that I actually thought might be interesting to do at all is to do work on anal cancer screening, because it's such an underserved need.
Yeah.
It's something that I actually found very rewarding and I think worthwhile. But in the end, I didn't try and pursue anything or uncover any jobs, and I just thought I'll just retire and
So what is
enjoy my stuff.
what fills your, what is Robbie Madoff doing now when you get up in the morning?
Reading the newspaper, having an extra cup of coffee. I go to the gym and work out. I ride my bike if the weather's halfway decent. I go to museums. I see a lot of movies. I've seen quite a lot of theater. I'm mad for the opera, just mad for the opera. So we go to the opera. Even when we were in Minnesota, we used to go, for anybody who happens to be listening, go watch the Met in the movie theaters, go to the opera, even in the movie theaters. It's so fantastic. So there's everything. And then, of course, my kids are in walking distance, and my grandkids are in walking distance. So we have a real opportunity to be part of that business.
So you're not bored.
I'm not bored. I haven't been bored yet. Yeah. Yeah, and I've got a lot of reading to do.
Yeah, and so, and how long are you retired now, or whatever?
Probably 8 months, something like that.
Okay, so you're still in your first year. Yeah.
Still in my first year. I haven't had the big depression hit yet.
Sure. Yeah. And so do you think, as you're still in the first glow of the niceness of it, are you thinking
free at last, free at last, praise the Lord, I'm free at last?
Yeah, exactly. Are you, contemplating the great American novel, or writing the memoirs of a lost soul who became a surgeon, or what?
Yeah, well, speaking of lost, I've been taking a course online on Paradise Lost, and
Yeah, indeed. It sits alongside Ulysses,
it's kind of, and there is a whole thing of, so John Milton was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost, and one of the things that he thought was the cause of it, he thought he had a film on his eyes, but he thought that it might have had to do with his chronic constipation.
I did not know that.
And then he has a pretty long discussion on the nature of angels and how they can actually change sex freely. They can,
Right.
I mean, it's all very 21st century. But the other thing was, it was a question of the age. Apparently, was can angels eat food? And in Paradise Lost, the angels are, at least before the fall, come down and hang out with Adam and hang out with Eve and talk with them and have meals with them. And it was something of a miracle. But Milton makes special note of the fact that they ate food and digested it, and they passed it with ease. So the angels had excellent bowel movements and probably were never going to go blind because of that. But that's the kind of thing. Well, maybe I'll just make a little presentation about defecation, Paradise Lost.
And do you think Milton had a regular supply of hallucinogenic drugs, or was it just occasional?
I believe this is not the academic opinion of him, but I think he was barking mad.
Yes.
Because
a different view, though,
because I don't know, it seems unfair. I mean, poetic license is fine, but he's a very devout person.
Mm.
He was also a regicide. He was like in favor of chopping off Charles I's head,
yes,
appointed restoration, all this stuff. But sorry, I just got sidetracked in my thought process. What he does is in this poem, he makes up. He's a guy who believes almost literally, I think, in the biblical story.
Yeah.
When he's writing about Eden and paradise and the interaction with the devils, he makes up all this stuff on his own authority about the war of the heavens, that when Satan and God actually fight and how they fought, their glittering armor, and how Satan built this big, kind of like something out of Star Wars, this gigantic mountain fortress, all this stuff that he just totally says, okay, I'm writing an epic about the beginning of Earth or the beginning of humanity, and I'm just going to say what I think based on nothing. It's crazy.
Well, and I think people say what they think, but it's their thoughts come through the prism of the understanding of the age as well, to a degree. And one of the things that has persisted throughout the ages is the connection of many aspects of life with bowel function. It's not new. I mean, it continues today. You just have to look at the.
That's why I can give the definitive presentation about this.
Yes, exactly. So, any bucket list items, either in travel or things you want to do, bungee jumping or.
Bungee jumping is maybe at the very bottom, the very top of my list of things I never want to do.
Yeah.
But I don't really have a bucket list.
Right.
I've been very fortunate to have traveled quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are places that I have loved and would love to go back to. I'm sure there are places that I've not been to that I would love to get to, that I intend to get to. The notion of a bucket list, to me, it's a little bit something that's always struck me is it seems like when people die, often enough you hear them say, and they just finished building their dream home.
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
Tragic. And I feel like a bucket list kind of is in the same category, that if you actually make a bucket list and he just finally did his bucket list, or he just missed his, but whatever it is. Anyway, I don't like the idea of a bucket list.
Yeah, I've heard of so many people within my hobby interest. I've heard of so many people that said, and he was building his last Ferrari, but sadly never got to drive it.
Like that. Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. And you go, that's like a bummer, that is. So I ask people a few standard questions. So as at this stage, or even at a further stage, how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
Lovable loser, non-lovable loser. No, I think, yeah, I don't know how many people will actually remember me. I
Yeah,
would say, to me, the thing I take the most pride in actually has been my piece of our fellowship.
mm-hmm.
We've trained a lot of remarkable people
Yeah,
that are scattered around academic colorectal surgery or in practice in colorectal surgery. And the number, we do 5 a year. You do it for 30 years or so, and suddenly you have a lot of
yes,
people that you've impacted. So I think that I'd love to, if I had a choice, I'd like to be remembered for that.
yeah.
Um, I like to think of myself as a skeptic about things. And I would like, for those who know me well enough or not, I would like for people to think skeptically about what they're told and what they read.
At least question. At
Question,
least question.
yeah, for sure. So
I
I
think
like
as
that.
you say, that there is a body of work that comes from, as you say, graduating 4 or 5 or 6 residents for 20, 30 years. You suddenly develop, it's a quite an alumni. And, I do recall the article written, which I think was in your honor, if I recall, which actually which was essentially Larry, one of your, that was an interesting fellowship year group.
Yes,
And, the article, which was ostensibly meant to be about you, but it was actually more about the four of you and what that experience was. And, those experiences live with people for the rest of their career.
for sure. For
Um,
sure.
um, so, so what do you think has been the biggest change in surgery in your career for the better and for the worse?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Mm.
I, or the better, is probably what we already touched upon, which is I actually do think that that the educational model has changed very dramatically, and so much to the better. When I was a medical student, one of the reasons I hesitated about surgery was it was a contact sport.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Very aggressive and very personal. And if you did something, even if you didn't do something wrong, the surgeons were just waiting to yell at you for something. That was my experience as a medical student.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people's experience as medical students. So I think didactically, so much for the better.
And this conversation we've had for the last hour or so would never have happened 25 years ago. Would have been considered a demonstration of weakness.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So that's a good thing. For the worse, what have we lost, do you think?
I would say unfortunately, the structure of giving medical care, I think.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, the multiple, and some of this is for systems improvement, or it's all directed towards systems improvement, but not always fruitfully. I mean, nobody's going back on the electronic medical record.
Sure. Yeah.
Not going backwards with that, but it brings a lot of bad
Yeah.
things with it. It brings, I think, for me personally, the inability to escape from Epic for even a second.
Yeah.
You can go to you can say, okay, oh my God, I'm way behind. I'm going to sit at my in basket, spend an entire weekend doing
Yeah.
nonsense is in there. And then come in Monday
Bad.
morning, and there's 50 more items that have come through.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to control that.
Yeah, no, it's bad. And I think the other question that people struggle with, and I see this with the various interviews that I do, is, the question, who is my doctor? That's been lost.
Oh.
Because there's a countless number. I mean, there are so many different answers to that. So I've got a little quickie 30-second thing for you. These are questions that there are no correct answers to, although I do actually know what the correct answer is. And you're not allowed any time to think about this. Are you ready?
Is it the cranial nerves?
No, it is not the cranial nerves. Are you ready to go?
Ready.
Okay.
I'm ready to be shamed.
You're right. Okay, Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
McDonald's or Burger King?
Burger King.
Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs. These are like the easiest questions in the world.
Mac or PC?
Mac.
Football or baseball?
Oh, that's hard. That one is hard. Football is indefensible. It's indefensible. But that's the one I like to watch. But I'm trying not to, because you maim people.
Yeah, only a bit.
Give them encephalopathy. So it's indefensible. But go ahead.
Home or away?
Home or away? Wow. You just like for where to be or a game? Home or away? I'm going to say home. I love to be away, but I'm going to say home.
All right. Well, thanks, Robbie. It's been fantastic.
John, great talking with you. You're a wonderful interviewer. Do you know that? Wonderful.
I don't know about that.
I can see when you retire, if you're not driving cars at excessive speed, maybe you should have a little talk show.
Well, maybe, but I really appreciate you spending time. So we're collecting a stock of these, and when we have enough, which is more or less now, we will start to release them, and they'll come out on YouTube and a podcast, and we will see whether the assembled millions are interested. But I, for one, was very interested to talk to you. It's always a pleasure. As you know, my daughter lives in Brooklyn, so there will be before long come a time where we will have to share a bite to eat.
I'm counting on you letting me know so we can nail down a date.
Absolutely.
Yeah, listen, thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun.
No, it's a pleasure. You take care.
Likewise, John.